Some needs assessments undertaken to estimate the extent of a problem are actually at-risk assessments or demand assessments according to definitions just offered. Such assessment may do duty for true needs assessment either because it's technically infeasible to measure need or because it's impractical for the program to deal only with the population in need. For example, although sexuality activities are sexually active individuals are immediately appropriate for family planning information. The target population for most family planning programs is women assumed to be at risk, generally defined by an age span such as 15 to 50. It will be difficult and intrusive for a program to attempt to identify and design only those who are sexually active as its target population. Similarly, whereas the in-need group for an evening education program may be all functionally illiterate adults, only those who are willing or who can be persuaded to participate can be considered the target population, such as an at-demand definition. The distinction between populations at risk, in need, and at demand are therefore important for estimating the scope of a problem. Estimating the size of the target population and designing, implementing, and evaluating the program. Incidence and prevalence. A useful distinction for describing the conditions a program aims to improve is the difference between incidence and prevalence. Incidence refers to the number of new cases of a particular problem that are identified or arise in a specific conditions, arise in a specified area or context during a specified period of time. Prevalence refers to the total number of existing cases in that area at a specified time. These concepts come from the field of public health, where they are sharply distinguished. To illustrate, the incidence of influenza during a particular month will be defined as the number of new cases reported during that month. Its prevalence during that month will be the total number of people afflicted, regardless of when they were first stricken. In the health sector, programs generally are interested in incidence when dealing with disorders of such duration, such as upper respiratory infections and minor accidents. Yeah, they are more interested in prevalence when dealing with problems that require long-term management and treatment efforts, such as chronic conditions and long-term illnesses. The concepts of incidence and prevalence also apply to social problems. In studying the impact of crime, for instance, a critical measure is the incidence of victimization, the number of new victims in a given area per interval at time. Similarly, in programs aimed at lowering drunken driver accidents, is the accidents is the incidence of such accidents may be the best measure the need for intervention. But for chronic conditions such as low educational attainment, criminality, or poverty, prevalence is generally the appropriate measure. In the case of poverty, for instance, prevalence may be defined as the number of poor individuals or families in a community at a given time, regardless of when they became poor. For other social problems, both prevalence and incidence may be relevant characteristics of the target population. In dealing with unemployment, for instance, it's important to know its prevalence, the proportion of the population unemployed at a particular time. If the program's concern is with providing short-term financial support for the newly unemployed. However, it's the incidence rate that defines the target population. Rates. In some circumstances, it's useful to be able to express incidence or prevalence as a rate within an area or population. Thus, the number of new crime victims in a community during a given period might be described in terms of the rate per 1,000 persons in that community. Rates are especially handy for comparing problem conditions across areas or groups. For example, in describing crime victims, it's informative to have estimates by sex and age group. Although almost every age group is subject to some kind of crime victimization, young people are much more likely to be victims of robbery and assault, whereas older persons are more likely to be victims of burglary and larceny. Men are considerably less likely than women to be the victims of sexual abuse and so on. The ability to identify program targets with different profiles of problems and risk allows the needs assessment to examine the way a program is tailored to those different groups. In most cases, it's customary and useful to specify rates by age and sex. In communities with cultural diversity, differences among racial, ethnic, and religious groups may also be nerede kalmıştık? The ability Bulgari and larceny men are considerably less likely than women to be victims of sexual abuse and so on. The ability to identify programs targets with different profiles of problems and risks allows a need assessment to examine the way a program is tailored to those different groups. In most cases, it's customary and useful to specify rates by age and sex in communities with cultural diversity. Differences among racial, ethnic, and religious groups may also be important aspects of a program's target population. Other variables that may be relevant for identifying characteristics of the target population include socioeconomic status, geographic location, and residential mobility. Alright. So